throughout the Old Testament, the Israelites are enslaved again and again because they keep acting like slaves. And I thought about this a lot. Like, what does it mean to act like a slave? One thing it means is to not stand up for yourself, to not feel like you can stand up for yourself, or to even excessively stand up for yourself, like take everything as an insult. For instance, the turn the other cheek. I believe there's a willingness to fight, and there's also a willingness to walk away from a fight. There's a line that is the free man line. And I thought about the willingness to sacrifice the fatted calf that the father shows in the parable of the prodigal son, where the prodigal son returns, the father sacrifices the fatted calf. And I thought about this in terms of like the Israelites walking around the desert eating manna, because I was wondering if the manna was psilocybin mushrooms, because they had cows and stuff, and they're following the cows around, leading the cows around. And like, why don't they have food? They have the cows. I'm like, well, since they have the cows, they'd have the mushrooms, because the mushrooms grow in the cow patties. But like, why didn't they kill the cows? And it's like, well, because a cow to a slave is status. So the tendency, in some sense, and they just followed this through, and I was like, oh, obviously, this is just how I came to it. But this is like a pattern that goes throughout the Old Testament, just throughout life. I'm like, how could it be anything else? It's the unwillingness to sacrifice the wealth that represents social status for the wealth that is true wealth is slavery. There's no difference. And that comes in like just any form. I really think about this. There's wealth that is wealth, like things that bring in more value, like factories, real estate, if you rent it out, can bring in value. Businesses of certain types can bring in value if they're structured the right way. And these things like health, investing in your health is real wealth. But that doesn't bring as much status as like investing in steroids and getting super shredded. It's like you could be healthier than someone on steroids, but they might have more status. You could be wealthier than someone driving a Ferrari, but they might have more status. You could be wealthier than someone who has better clothes than you, but they might have more status. It's not that these things don't matter. They matter, and they should be pursued within the proper hierarchy. I think this is what God means, or Jesus means, when he says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things more will be added onto you. He's saying that the things that you want are necessary. Like, you'll realize they're necessary, and you'll provide them as a result of wisdom when that wisdom says it's necessary, not as the first thing. Like, the goal is not the nice clothes. You wear the nice clothes so you're presentable when you go in the nice situation, but you going in the nice situation because you've done something that makes it incumbent on you to go present nicely. Like, you're not just going in there to mooch off of people. And this is the difference between like God and like despotism, between like Fordism and despotism, between the Israelites as slaves and the Israelites as free people. Because like, what's the difference between the Mycenaeans and the Israelites? I mean, the Israelites, they make real sacrifices, but the whole Pharisee problem is the problem with the Pharisees. They reason it away to the point where you're not making real sacrifices. Whereas at least the Mycenaeans, you can see this dedication to sacrifice, like killing the bulls and stuff, and they really went out. And it's like this is even interesting, like Circe. So Circe is a very particular type of woman that I believe arises from a particular type of society, and creates a particular type of society. Like, the older a society gets, the more oriental it gets. Like, if you look at the Orient, they rigidly control their women in like Asian countries. You could be like, oh, they're westernized, like, but then there's also like matriarchal structures within these things. I mean, but again, like, it's the Orientalism, this is Nietzsche's observation, but the Orientalism towards woman is a result of the oldness of a society. So the Mycenaeans were a very young society because Circe is a remnant of the decay of an older society. So like, I see the Mycenaeans as coming in, again, from the same time period as Moses, coming into the Mediterranean and using their seafaring capabilities to allow them to evade regulation by Troy and Egypt and these major powers at the time. Egyptians being the lotus eaters, obviously, because they're famous for lotus. Egyptian lotus. Go look into it. So back to I forget what I was thinking. I was just thinking about like whether or not Dionysus was the leader of the Greek symposium and whether or not Jesus basically symbolically replaced Dionysus as the leader of the symposium, as I think this figure that you have like Dionysus as a young child being carried by fawns, and like this represents the divine element of man being cultivated by the half wild element of man. You can think of this as people, like most people are kind of like peasants and rabble. They're just, I mean, they are. Like, if you're watching long form YouTube videos, you probably have a higher attention span. These people are watching Kardashians and stuff. I mean, if you're just drinking, like, God bless them, but like, if your highest aspiration in life does not involve the cultivation of your mind, you're like a satyr. Just are. It's fine. The satyrs raised Dionysus. Dionysus then creates the wine that civilizes the satyrs. What's the wine that civilizes the satyrs? I mean, I think Jesus, I'm reading this book, The Immortality Key, which is about the connection between the Eleusinian mysteries and Christianity. And that was what led me to the thought about the Israelites in the desert and whether or not they're eating psilocybin mushrooms. Because I was just like, what the heck was the manna? Because I'm just thinking about God in different ways now. I'm thinking about God in a more nuanced way, because I'm understanding that the mathematics that created the technological atheism of today is an example of the Christian thought of the gospel. So, and this is, I think, where Christopher Langan is very interesting for the CTMU, which I haven't read yet, but I intend to go read the CTMU at some point. And I'm really just, I don't think I don't know. I want to look into the CTMU, but were the Israelites... So, okay, back to the thing of the habits that lead to slavery. Whoever does not have 2/3 of his waking hours to his own devices is a slave. That's Nietzsche. So, I would just say that it is incumbent on all of us to not act like slaves, to not sacrifice. But okay, again, the definition of slavery. The definition of slavery is the unwillingness to sacrifice social status for wealth. Like, in some sense, like the slave, like at some point you're so afraid of what the other slaves will think of you, you won't even risk your own freedom. You can have a self-regulating society of slaves. You can have that with the monkey and the ladder, like the monkey's in the ladder at the cage, and the monkey goes to the ladder to get the bananas, and they spray all the monkeys, and then you keep replacing the monkeys. Well, you do that until the monkeys beat up monkeys who try to go up the ladder, and then you keep replacing monkeys until none of the original monkeys are there, but they still beat up whatever monkey tries to go up the ladder, because whenever a new monkey was reintroduced, one at a time, he would try to go up the ladder, and then they'd all beat him up, and then they'd remove another monkey, and then they'd reintroduce another monkey, and the same thing would just happen until they all just like, oh yeah, we just beat up the monkeys to try to get up the ladder. This is sort of like the recursive problem of guilt and sin, and I think this is why the Mycenaeans were able to overcome this, because they were doing psilocybin mushrooms. So I think that like there's probably a connection between these things. And I mean, like, let's get like, okay, the true history of Christianity. I don't know what to make of all this stuff. I mean, I was making a video. I make this video on like, I wonder if like God, if Antarctica was the original Garden of Eden. Like, Antarctica was where this all started. And you have the first civilization was during a warm phase of the Earth, where Antarctica served as a center point for the naval-centric military power that went out and colonized the entire Earth and taught the entire Earth, which was probably not as habitable, agriculture. And this mass agriculture led to the widespread cultivation of plants across the entire Earth, which led to a cooling of the Earth, and thus, because of the oxygen produced, which created ice caps at both the poles, thus sinking Atlantis underneath ice. And if there's this overall tendency of civilization to not only move westward, but to also move up, like if we've been experiencing just cycles from the origins of humanity, of civilization, because there's this the Western tendency of civilization is interesting. I mean, I think Egypt is west of Rome, but there's this westward tendency of civilization because I don't know. Maybe it's because people look at the sun and it's rising in the east. If they identify more with where the sun's coming from than where the sun's going, they stay in the east. But over time, what this has led to is this leads to the East being more ancient. Like China is a much older civilization than our civilization, or at least its instantiation is much more static. And it seems to be intaking information that was previously understood. I mean, this is like the advanced nepotism I talked to my cousin about. And this sort of advanced nepotism, to escape this, you move west. Even today, there's more nepotism in the East than in the West to a degree. When you get maximally West, it's more nepotistic because there isn't enough established nepotism to challenge the new nepotism. You need like a balance of old and new nepotism to create dynamic nepotism that's actually free. Yeah. Like even Lewis and Clark need to befriend the natives to get across the country. I mean, it's just nepotism all the way. Like you got to befriend people in order to like get places. But it's fine because I subscribe to the Mycenaean concept of xenia, hospitality. So it's all good. We can be friends as long as we understand xenia, and then we don't have to kill each other, and that's nice. So ultimately, I was just wondering, like what if civilization just keeps moving west and north until like let's say next time it's like, I don't know, I wonder, like, is Russia the third Rome? People talk about Russia being the third Rome and like the brain drain effect. I mean, I just want to be wherever the world is brain draining to, because that's a better place to be than wherever the world's brain draining from. And wherever that is seems to be Rome. So I think that was the major innovation of Egypt, is they realized they could brain drain rather than just be nepotistic. And then the Romans were like aqueducts and brain drain. And we're like aqueducts, brain drain. There should be psychedelics involved, but there isn't. But our pharmacopoeia is very developed. But our pharmacopoeia is based on Christian thought. So I'm like, I converted to Christianity, and then I'm like wondering, I'm like, okay, how much of this is... Like, this guy's talking about how the church, he believes the church fathers were basically covering up the drug cult that was early Christianity, which makes sense to me because psychedelics and religion just lend itself to the sort of thing that he's describing in The Immortality Key. Just go read the book. It's really interesting. I don't want to make this video about that, or do I? I don't really know. The original purpose of the video is just the patterns that lead to slavery and the patterns that lead away from slavery consistently. And moving towards competency and the growing of your own family system within the area that the world is brain draining to is the best way to not be a slave. Because if you're just trying to make it in like Afghanistan or something, you're subject to these financial pressures due to zoning and geography and just the history of the entire inertia of all of the behavior of the human species, that makes it difficult to remain free because you're just being pushed around by these external forces. So you have to go to the eye of the hurricane to free yourself from the external forces, but still remain highly engaged in the process of the world. And showing that by your willingness to always invest in real wealth, always pursue the real meaning, seek the kingdom of heaven, and seek it not in like this dogmatic religious way, but just actually... There's this meditation I did last night that I'm just telling you about because it came to my mind, but it feels almost sacrilegious to say because it's such a holy thing that I felt like I experienced. Maybe it was holy. Probably was very holy. Definitely was holy. So I just, like, the part of me that wants to be close to God is also God. The part of me that wants God is God, or the closest part of me to God. So I just decided that since I had an urge to meditate in order to become closer to God, I was going to focus on meditating on the specific part of me that wanted that and expanding that, and just doing that through breathing. And like we're made in the image of God, but like I can only do that because I'm in a really great state of being where everything's working properly. So it's kind of like external in, because we outsource our sanity to other people. So like right now, my little Katerina is coming in. She needs my help, so I'm going to go help her sanity. But I invest in my children, and I raise them the way I believe that they should be raised, and homeschool them and stuff, so that they're not indoctrinated, because I believe that this leads to more free thinking, more freedom, more of the Mycenaean culture that Thomas Paine talks about, and that the United States itself was founded on. Yes.